Over 2 weeks ago, 3 Israeli teenagers were abducted, and they were discovered earlier this week. To talk about it, they were discovered and have died. To talk about it is Ambassador Ido Aharoni, General Counsel of Israel. Mr. Ambassador, welcome to Big 550 KTRS here in St. Louis.
Thank you for having me, McGraw.
What can you tell us about the latest? What do we know happened to these boys?
Well, they were abducted 20 days ago, a few minutes after their abduction, and when they were on their way home, hitchhiking. They were murdered in cold blood by 2 Palestinian members of Hamas. We know who they are. We know the families they come from. We know their organizational affiliation. The 2 perpetrators are on the run, running for their lives. They're hiding. But we will pursue them, we will get them, and we will bring them to justice.
How much of this was a concentrated effort by the organization, and how much of this was just 2 rogue, bad people out to do terrible things to a couple of boys?
Well, Hamas has denied any direct involvement, but they cannot escape their overall responsibility for creating the general directive that allowed this to happen and for creating, more importantly, and nurturing the culture of death that they stand for. This, our listeners have to understand. Within the Palestinian society, there are 2 camps, one that supports Palestinian statehood and one that supports Islamic rule. Hamas, the organization that advocates Islamic rule, is all about hatred, bigotry, and terrorism. And at the end of the day, and this is the tragedy of the Palestinian people, they view the Palestinian national movement as their enemy no less than they view Israel and the United States as their enemy. And the ongoing failure of the Palestinian leadership over the years to face their opposition, to effectively crush them, I believe is the tragedy of the Palestinian people and the main reason why we don't have peace with them.
Is it true, Ambassador, that hundreds of Palestinians took part in the search?
Well, the search for the boys was conducted by the Israeli police, by the Israeli military, by Israeli citizens, and I assume that some local Palestinians also helped in the process, and we're very appreciative for that.
One of the boys was a U.S. citizen. Is that correct?
Yes. His family originally is from Brooklyn, New York.
And do we know what happened, or were they killed shortly after they were abducted? Were they held? Do we know what their plight was after they were abducted?
Well, what happened was that they were picked by a car, a stolen Israeli vehicle that had Israeli license plates. The Israeli radio station was on to mislead them. They went into the car, did not suspect anything, and shortly thereafter they realized that they were abducted. One of the boys called the police and left his cell phone open for quite some time, so that now we have the taping of that, what went on in the car, and it turns out, tragically, that they were killed in cold blood by the 2 murderers a few minutes after they boarded the car.
We hear about kidnappings and abductions in the United States almost every single day. We don't hear about this in Israel. Is this something that happens in Israel that we don't hear about, or is this something that just never happens?
Well, this is why it is such a national day of mourning in Israel, because we were all once children, and many of us are parents. And when you send your child to school, you expect them to return home safe. And that's why it's so shocking. This is such a brutal, heinous murder, senseless, for no reason. It doesn't really achieve anything. It's such a horrible crime.
If it's considered maybe a terrorist act, could it be considered a war crime?
Well, Hamas is you're looking at an organization that is responsible for the killing of thousands of Israelis over the years, maiming tens of thousands of Israelis over the years. Essentially no different than Al-Qaeda, essentially no different than Islamic Jihad, essentially no different than ISIS. They're all the same. They're talking about Islamic rule, not interested in democracy. They view the West and Western values as their main threat, as their main enemy. and they're set out to destroy our world and to drag us all back to the Dark Ages. This is what they're all about. They're not about the future. They're about the past.
President Mahmoud Abbas criticized the kidnappings, but he denies that there's any link to Hamas.
Well, of course he would deny that because he's in bed with them. Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, has done a terrible disservice to the hopes of his people to become independent and to the hopes of the entire world to see peace in the Middle East by forming this ill-conceived political alliance with the terrorist organization Hamas. He did that a couple of months ago against the better judgment of Israel and the United States and the entire international community. And what we're seeing today is a direct result of this terrible decision made by Abu Mazen Mahmoud Abbas.
Ambassador Ido Aharoni, General Counsel of Israel, thank you for your time, and thanks for talking to us on a very sad day.
Thank you for having me.
You got it. 7:42 here on the Big 550 KT.